Good morning, everybody. Bonjour. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Great to see everybody today. Lots of familiar faces in the audience and some new ones too, so hope to have the chance to connect. Listen, we have a great session today, Breaking Stereotypes and Building Gender Equity and Skills. Lots of great discussion this morning already. I'm Kathryn Rowan. I'm Executive Director of the Global Apprenticeship Network. We are a not-for-profit, multi-sectoral, private sector-led organization that's been around for about 10 years. We are very happy to have great member companies like L'Oréal and Nestle and others around the table, but also founding partners like the International Labour Organization, the IOE, OECD, and OECD for Business, who are founding partners. So very happy to be here with you today. We have representatives from GAN Global and also our partners in Canada who are also at in the audience today as well. So we have a great program today, and I think that the morning session really enabled us to kick things off. As your moderator, I'm not going to get you to do sort of an interactive alphabetical country listing. I think we did that this morning, and I think we're all full of energy, and I can tell that we're from many, many parts of the world. But perhaps we could, perhaps just before we get started and kick things off, I'd like to just put things in context. I thought this morning the Minister, Nicole Belloubet, did a really good job of putting things in context in terms of where we are here today and spelling out some of the opportunities. But let me just remind you of a few of them. First is that labor and skill shortages for sure are expected, and they're going to continue to rise. There's no question about that. So there's issues in terms of access to labor and access to skilled individuals. And this is predominantly due to demographic changes and also, as other people mentioned today, lack of technical skills and in digital, for example, and green technologies, as was mentioned a few times this morning. Women are underrepresented in many new and emerging skill areas, and there's no doubt about that, in emerging occupations, and there's a huge untapped pool of talent that is really at the ready there. Bringing more women into technical and vocational and education training is a strategy that goes, we really need to overcome. But ultimately, it's going to also lead to better gender equity. So, and if we zero in on some of the OECD countries, gender differences amongst TVET students are quite stark. If we take a look, for example, the data tells us that girls are overrepresented in TVET programs such as health, where 83% of grads are female, and also in education, where 78% of graduates are female. And then on the flip side, if you look at information communication technology, ICT, you've only got 18%, and engineering is also tracking in that space as well. So it really is. We have opportunities here. We're going to try to today unpack some of that. And it's really not just a question of bringing women into technical professions, but also how do you retain them, and how do we make sure that we have the opportunities to keep them within those professions. And there's another session, by the way, later this afternoon. Some of you may be already registered. It's reimagining workplaces and cultivating inclusion, attracting more women into STEM. I think it's going to be in this location at 4 o'clock. So it will be able to dive a little bit even more deeply into the topic of how to make that happen in the workplace. So today we're going to address some of the issues around women entering, what is stopping women from entering male-dominated areas, and the impact that this has on the world of work. And we're going to look at ways in which policymakers, for instance, can kind of think about this, and how we're going to redesign TVET programs and sectoral policies to break down some of these entrenched gender gaps in the world of work. So, without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce our esteemed panel, and we have a little obviously you saw the few technical difficulties this morning with the microphones. We're going to be sharing microphones here today. We have two, so we'll be passing along the mic as we start to go into the questions. But just to my left, I'm very happy to introduce Eliza Mohamedou, who's the head of Center for Skills for the OECD. Welcome, Eliza. Very nice to have you here. To Eliza's left, we have Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Science, Technology, Republic of South Africa, and Buti Manamela. Buti, welcome. So glad to have you here as well. Shae White is our WorldSkills Champions Trust representative for the Americas, and you'll hear more about Shae in just a few minutes. Very also happy to have Rainer Iveson, who is the Global Director, L'Oreal for Youth. And thrilled, and to his left, we have Manuela Geleng from the European Commission, who's Director for Jobs and Skills. So a really esteemed panel. Great to have them. Everyone, we were talking earlier before the session, and everyone loved this morning's panel and was very excited to be here today. So thanks for joining us, all of you. We're going to start off, as your moderator sort of kicked things off in the last session, we're going to start off with a sort of one sentence for each one of you, and maybe we'll start with Manuela. What do you think? It's one sentence. How did gender influence or even determine your own personal career path?
Okay, so, well, I think I grew up without boundaries, which meant I had to learn how to repair a plug and how to change a tire. I might not have liked it then, but I understood it afterwards.
Rainer.
Nothing like starting with an easy question, hey?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so myself, honestly, curiosity and just keeping open to taking bets led the way. So I can't particularly say it was gender. I joined L'Oreal, which typically males don't always look for, but they were my client beforehand and I knew about them, so I just took the leap over.
Thank you.
Shae.
As for me, I didn't consider gender at all. I just wanted to be a chef, so that's the vocation I decided to pursue.
Good for you.
Oh, here.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I suppose for me, it's I actually wanted to be a journalist, but when my mother had that and she was having none of it, and said I must go study electronics. But I think because I grew up in a family where there were no gendered roles, so if you want to eat, you got to cook for yourself. If you want to fix a bulb, you've got to do it yourself. So it's somewhat shaped by perception of gender roles and the fact that we need to overcome those. And I think it's still something that plays a crucial role in whatever contributions I make. Thank you.
So in my case, I would say gender has had the impact in all ways and always. So I think, unlike some of the other speakers, I did grow up with boundaries. So starting from the choice of what to study, where to work, how to work, and I think it continues actually even today in terms of the kind of work we do and how I interact with others, being a woman and of a diverse origin as well. So I think I would say always and in all types of shapes.
Thanks, Eliza. Thanks so much. So really, environment really shapes, as one would imagine, one's origins, one's decisions. So fantastic stories. Shae, I'm going to turn things over to you now. So you, in keeping with, sort of the personal story, tell us a little bit about, you're a trained chef. You've competed at WorldSkills Kazan in 2019 for Barbados. And you have training in two parts of the world, so both Barbados and Canada. So tell us a little bit about, your story and the situation of women in the culinary world, in places where you've worked.
Okay, so like she said, I am from Barbados. I lived there for 22 years, and I've recently moved to Canada. And moving to Canada was a culture shock for me because back home, women weren't underrepresented in the kitchen. In my graduating class at my college, there were about 60 of us that were women and only like 10 or so men. So when I went into work as well, there was a lot of women as well. It was mainly equal in terms of men and women. In terms of Canada, I'm one of only 2 women that work in my current kitchen. So it was definitely a shock for me. When I initially started my job, I was the only woman in the kitchen. So it was, for the first time, I had a bit of job insecurity where it was, will I be hired? Will I be taken seriously? Because there are a lot of kitchens in Canada where there are only men employed, and you will see all of the women work in the restaurant and the servery as cashiers. So I did have to take a step back and ask myself, perhaps I might have to change what I'm doing and what I pursue, but I'm very passionate about my job and I do enjoy my work. So I just take it as it comes, and I believe my work speaks for itself. So my gender has no basis on my capability as a chef.
That's a great attitude. And people who feel a little bit, well, I can't do it because I'm a woman or a man, should probably take a page out of your book.
You're capable of anything, to be honest.
There you
it
go.
It doesn't matter.
You're capable of anything. And did you have any specific role models or anybody that you really looked up to who taught you how to act and behave, or was it inside?
A bit of both, to be honest. Growing up, I told my parents I wanted to be a chef when I was 8 years old. Nobody believed me, of course, because I was 8. But growing up, Food Network was very important to me. It was seeing Kat Cora on Iron Chef America being the only woman represented in that kitchen, going head to head with these men, and being taken seriously and being very good at what she does. So if she could do it, I could as well. And coming from Barbados, in the Caribbean in general, food is very intrinsic to our culture. And food is something that brings people together. So growing up, my family has gatherings multiple times a year where food is the basis of that gathering, and you just have conversations, you get caught up with everything that's going on with everybody. So I do believe those 2 things played into it a bit, and I've always enjoyed being in the kitchen, cooking with my parents and my grandparents. So it played in a bit, but I genuinely do enjoy being a chef and love the vocation of cooking and culinary arts.
That's fantastic. And what about stereotypes? I mean, did you at all, do you think it affects the choices that people make? I mean, did you do it because you felt, that's what girls do, or it was just because what you wanted to do?
It was what I wanted to do. And earlier, Raina brought up the bear. If you've seen the bear, that is exactly what working in the kitchen is like. It's hot. Tensions run high, emotions run high, there's blood, sweat, and tears involved. So it is a high-pressure environment that I do believe you need to have a thick skin to work in. It can take its toll on you physically and mentally, but for me, it was not important because I believe my passion outweighs the stress of the day-to-day job, so it's worth it for me.
So, but work culture really influences
Absolutely.
your day-to-day and retaining talent. I'm sure people have walked out the door because they couldn't handle, the stress.
When I was beginning my culinary career at my college, one of my tutors actually said, half of you are going to drop out of this course when you realize what the workload is and what being a chef truly entails. And he was right. There were about 115 of us when I started, and only 70 of us graduated. And I've seen people leave kitchens in tears. It is very, very hard and daunting work, but I do believe that if you're passionate enough about it, you can overcome that rather. And it's part of the job, to be honest. It is what it is, and you just have to work with it.
Being a chef is not for the faint of heart, clearly. No, well done, Shae. No, awesome. Well, I think a lot of people will take notes in terms of your fortitude and
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. So that's sort of at the personal level. Now let's kind of move things up to more 100,000 feet on the policy side. And I'm looking over at Elisa from the OECD perspective, because there's a lot of data and analysis that has gone on in this space. And Elisa, you have a lot of experience. You've had 25 years of working with international organizations in the space, and it's been remarkable. Can you tell us a bit about the kind of like the root causes and around gender gaps, and how that leads to gender segregation in the world of work, and maybe some of the barriers that cause that? I think you need a microphone, don't you?
That would be useful, yes. So the root causes start very early, so at home, in the classroom, and in the workplace. And so what we see, for instance, when we do the PISA survey, which looks at 15-year-old, is that you see that about 75% of the 15 years old have a very clear idea of what they plan to do and where they see themselves when they're 30 years old. So it's really sort of the ideas of what they can do and where they see themselves start very early. You only have about 25% who have a vague idea or are still considering. There's been other studies as well, for instance, in the UK at the primary school age, where you see that young people already have very clear also ideas of what they think they cannot do. So that's quite interesting as well, because that means that early intervention when it comes to stereotypes is really important. And so that's one part. The idea as well of the role models, and I think, is also important, because a lot of young people grow up not knowing that they can do certain things because they don't see the people that look like them doing those jobs. So that's something that's quite important as well. And then when we come to VET, for instance, then of course men are overrepresented in vocational education and training. About, sort of female only cover about 45%. That also, of course, changes from one country to the other. So there are countries where the female are more represented. But as you said in the opening, they're very much overrepresented in specific areas. So very much around healthcare, nursing, teaching profession, and much less in the STEM areas, so engineering, manufacturing, and so on. That's not just a choice. It also has a point as well around apprenticeships. So apprenticeships you can see that a lot of female are not taking up apprenticeships, because those are, for one, not really represented in the occupations in which they're interested. They're much more present when you go into manufacturing and so on. But if you look at a very recent data, for instance, in the US, you have only about, I think it's about less than 20% of apprentices in 2021 were female. And in Canada, I think the data was around 11.5 only. So very, very little. And what that means is also that they tend to go much more into the VET school programs. And that has a lot as well it has really a great impact when it goes after into what they can do, how they've learned about doing it, and how they also can transfer those skills to other professions. So if we add up all of these sort of confining areas from a very early age, then I think there's no wonder that we end up with these figures much later on.
No question. Anything else to add on the education side? No, I mean, I think clearly some great opportunities there. Maybe we can just shift to, thank you for that, and we can shift over to, from a country-specific standpoint. And Buti, perhaps tell us a bit about South Africa and what some of the main sort of skill shortages there are, and the kind of the sectors that are linked to gender equity.
Okay, thank you. Look, I mean, historically, just as is the case anywhere in the world, there are specific gendered roles that are informed by, people's cultures and perceptions, but also individuals' choices. And just as is the case in South Africa, most of the roles, which are, like office administration and so on and so forth, that's where predominantly, either by choice or because on the supply side, that's what's available, women follow that. But we're beginning to see a lot of, young women taking up apprenticeships and artisanships in careers such as construction, electrical works, mechanical engineering, and so forth, which have historically been reserved for, for men. But what we've also seen is even the gendered roles within the family, which have historically been regarded as a women's role, things like chefs and so on and so forth. I think just as your experiences, so they were regarded as women's chores because they were unpaid. But when it gets into industry, men assume those professions because now they're paid. And so you're beginning to see this mix in terms of career choices. It is not at the level at which we would want to see it, so it's a combination of factors. I think firstly we have to address the cultural issues. We have to, engage with especially young women. I mean, we have specific programs that are specifically targeted at promoting young women, and I'll speak to those much later on. But we've got to deal with the cultural issues at home. We've got to deal with the cultural issues in the private sector. So people have got their own biases. A person who's owning a mine would prefer a man engineer or a male engineer as opposed to a woman to go in and operate those shafts. And so we've got to deal with those cultural preferences that are informed by historical issues, and decisions that are taken in the private sector. We've also got to deal with, the cultural issues at an institutional level, where women, would be encouraged to take up specific career paths just because they are regarded as women's, career path. And I think that will also help us in dealing generally with the question of skills shortage, because the more you drive women into roles that have traditionally been regarded as, men role, you're beginning to change the perception. You're also beginning to see young women seeing themselves in people who perform that role. I think the point that you were making, earlier on, and it therefore helps us to change the kind of stereotypes that are there about certain careers and whether they should be pursued by particular genders or not. Yeah.
Great, thank you, and I'm assuming there are specific initiatives that South Africa has implemented related to cultural topics, right? Okay, at all levels. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to shift over to Manuela, the other side of the room there. Manuela, the European Commission has been responsible for implementing its skills agenda, so very capable and highly the right person to be at the table with us today. And, I guess an important question would be around, gender equality and equal opportunities in the labor market. It's one of the key priorities, as I understand it, for the European Commission. What sectors do you think would really benefit from attracting women? And then maybe a second question would be around what can policymakers do to address? What kind of policies, can we put in place to remove those barriers, stopping women to access those jobs and those roles? So over to you.
Thank you. Well, in the European Union, of course, we have, as was already mentioned before, very big labor and skills shortages. And in many sectors, actually around 40 economic sectors. And besides that we need more people in these sectors, we need also, in many sectors, a more diverse workforce. If we look at the healthcare sector, for instance, 9 out of 10 workers are women. If we look at the construction sector, 9 out of 10 workers are men. What I think is more important is also to look where we are going. We are going through a green and digital transition. And if we look at these two transitions, we see the situation is actually even worse, because in the IT sector, we have very few women present. And for many years, we have had targets to increase the participation of women. We want to have 20 million IT specialists by 2030. We have 9 million now. And we would like to achieve gender balance. And we are almost there. I mean, it's in 6 years, and there is a long way to go. Also, with the green transition, we see that only 30% of the jobs are held by women. And we know that the growth of jobs will be in these two sectors, green and digital. So we clearly need to make an effort to bring more women into the labor market. We have 20 million that are not on the labor market, 20 million women out of a workforce of 240 million. And we have 8 million young people that are not in education, training, or employment. So we have potential, but it's still not on the labor market. And that's also why we launched an action plan in spring this year to look how we can activate more people and bring more women in certain jobs and more men in other jobs where there is a gender unbalance. I think what we can do at European Union level, because most of the things can be done by member states or by companies at regional and local level, is to, well, first of all, to put the information, the communication, to communicate on that, to design policies that promote more gender equality on the labor market, and also funding. And that's what actually we are doing. We also think that role models are incredibly important. We had recently an event where we had precisely WorldSkills champions that were women in sectors that are normally male-dominated, and vice versa. So this is also a way to practically show to young people that they can access careers that perhaps they would not think at first sight.
That's great. Role modeling is absolutely essential, and we've seen that. And whether it's whether it's the private sector or elsewhere, and what clearly from your comments is obvious that everybody has a role to play. Doesn't matter where you are, whether you're a policymaker in the private sector, you name it, you've got a role, or a WorldSkills champion as well. I think what your comment actually, your final comment actually, is a perfect segue over to our next question around for Rainer. Because Rainer, as the global director for L'Oréal for Youth, your job has been to expand the program on a global basis, and it's super exciting. But it's we often talk about male-dominated field, right? And Manuela just highlighted the fact that at the conference they had female-dominated people in female-dominated fields. So the question is, how, from an industry perspective, what are some of the systemic reasons why men don't prefer certain professions, and how then do you attract men into those professions and that are normally female-dominated? I'm sure there'll be some tips for the other way around as well.
No, exactly, and thank you for the question. I mean, all the mechanics we put in play can definitely be flipped onto how to attract females into other industries. But fundamentally, L'Oréal attracts females as a natural pull lever into the business, whether it's the roles or what beauty stands for. But it all comes to the historic preference of jobs. And when we're looking into it, L'Oréal specifically struggles to get males into HR, communications, marketing, because not all men in the world want to market a lipstick as it comes through. But when we look at this, it's been said today, in essence, it's about the stereotypes that are in play, it's about the influence that's in schools and education, and it's about that collective responsibility that we can play together. And as L'Oréal, we're obsessed with understanding these barriers, and it's part of this awareness to the students, to the youth today, of what really exists, because they're the typical perceptions. And let's be honest, deciding an employer is tough. And it's about giving youth that confidence that they can go into a female-dominated world, and have that confidence through skills is also a hook that we're looking at into. And then also the perception. When you're working for a business, you don't only want to work with one gender. It's about diversity, and you need to be educated and understand what the companies offer. So we open that up. And additionally, family pressure. So I worked in Saudi Arabia for a while in recruitment, and I was meeting guys trying to persuade them to come to L'Oréal, and the decisions were sitting with the family and saying you should go to a L'Oréal competitor that sells a detergent. I won't say which one, but because that suits you more. And there's a lot of stereotypes and prejudice that sits in, and it's our duty to open minds and create as many access points for people as possible. But as you said, it all starts with a commitment. So for L'Oréal, if we ever step the foot off the gas on gender balance, it will become female-dominated. So we've had a goal for many years of 60-40. So 60% females, 40% males is the realistic balance that we've got in play. But it doesn't really finish there, because then we have to think, okay, we know the issue, but how do we attract this gender through to the business? And then it comes back down to data. And we're looking to Universum, and we know for men, they like job security, they're looking for learning, career development, exposure to leadership, and clear advancement in their careers. Not to say women don't, but when you look at preferences of appeal, we've gone into that to think how to pull the other gender into industries or job roles that they don't always consider. And then the key steps from a private company or that, or business that we really take into play is advocacy. So we need to increase on that. We're always striving to do more. Education. It's our responsibility to get these role models into schools, into universities, so people are seeing the alternative careers they can take as well. We work on case studies, so we actually build a lot of case studies into education as well, accessible to all genders. And then similar to today, we have a competition called Brandstorm, and it's all about innovation, skills-focused for equitable access. But I think the biggest one that I wanted to just share right now is, and I heard it on the stage earlier, about how we need to reinvent, our approach to youth in order to use skills as this universal currency. And we've got our management trainee program. And historically at L'Oréal, it's always just been rotations, okay? Whereas today, we're going to create something we're calling prescribed skills to every rotation to make this more appealing for males as well as females as we're coming into the attraction point of joining the beauty business. That isn't just beauty, it can be tech powered by beauty and other skills that we can identify in the youth.
Wow, so a lot of different initiatives that are currently being undertaken at L'Oréal that could be applied elsewhere, whether it's role modeling, advocacy, communication, skill building, changing your programs, you name it. There's a lot there. Great, so that's actually also a perfect segue to the next topic, which is really around, now that we've unpacked the issues, where do we go from a solution standpoint? So I wanted to take a look at, we've heard a bit from the European Commission, we've also heard from Rainer on the private sector side in terms of what are some of the solutions. At the policy level, it'd be interesting to think about maybe a very specific example, and I'm looking at Buti, and I'll give you the microphone in a sec, is the issue of, where in South Africa, what specifically have you done to improve sort of the gender equity in jobs? And what's been working on the ground?
Yeah, look, firstly, I think it's obviously policy, and we've put in place policies at both on the supply side, meaning that we encourage institutions, to provide proper career guidance to everyone. And not to stereotype certain careers as men or women, but that it's careers that everyone should be able to pursue. And secondly, to put in place incentives such as bursaries, which moves along the science, technology, engineering, mathematics line that are specifically targeting young women. And careers that spins off from those areas of study, and we've seen a lot of uptake, and I think thirdly to on the supply side also enforce targets and incentivize institutions that meets up those targets. We've seen high levels of graduation of young women, universities, TVET colleges, and our community colleges, partly because of the incentives, but also partly because we beginning to bring down the stereotypes and encourage young women at an early age. As far back as 1999, 98, we started a program in the country, Take a take a girl child to work, which I think also had some global resonance. And it's beginning to yield some of the results, so much so that we're beginning to feel that we're neglecting the boy child. So that's that on the supply side, and then on the demand side, there's obviously policies around employment equity, which insist that companies should at all levels employ equitably across genders, but also to encourage organizations such as trade unions and employer organizations themselves to monitor their members to make sure that they stick to the policies that have been or that are in place. But I think the other important thing is, at an ownership level, we're beginning to see more women taking up bigger responsibilities in ownership in the private sector, running their own companies. And so when you see that, of course, it's not automatic that, if a woman is a chief executive of an engineering firm, she would, be biased towards women. But we are beginning to see that women who are at the helm of certain companies in the private sector, respond favorably towards the employment of women in those particular sectors. So those are some of the interventions that we've made, both at a policy but also at a practical level, to intervene in both the supply and the demand side.
Some excellent ideas there, in terms of how you can really activate, and you're seeing results, obviously. Yeah, fantastic. Shifting over to Europe, then, Manuela, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what policies have been put in place, and what, really what helps countries sort of activate. More women getting into technical jobs, and then on the reverse, more men going into female-dominated roles. What's helped out there?
Well, what's helped? I think the issue is still out for decision, but I think we are looking at it from two perspectives. One is the education and training side, right. And clearly we have been putting a lot of focus on STEM, education and training. And if you have looked at the political guidelines for the next 5 years of the European Commission, there is also, again, a very strong focus on STEM, on an initiative on STEM. So clearly this is going to remain there, because this is the starting point, as we all agree on. Then I think there is a labor market issue, and because what we see is that women that study STEM then don't go into STEM. They go into a STEM job, but they leave it after a few years because they are not comfortable with the working environment. So there is also a need to work in the workplace, to make the workplace more open to both genders. It can be also a healthcare job where men would not feel comfortable. So I think this is also an aspect that we are looking at, and we have been promoting these aspects both in vocational training and education, as well as at higher education level. Now, we are also looking beyond our borders, obviously, because there are very good practices across the world, and we have been working on a task force on talent in the tech area with the US as part of the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, and we have seen there that there are quite some differences of how the US and the European Union approach this issue, and where we could learn from them. We have seen how active their colleges are and how businesses are. So I think this is also ways to think how we can better work. We have been for years now building partnerships, both through centers of vocational excellence or large-scale partnerships through the Pact for Skills. and with all actors that should be involved, and probably this is a way that we need to continue. I mentioned role models before. I think in the European Year of Skills campaign, we had a male nurse from Denmark. So this is to show that there are possibilities for everyone, and also funding. We have been also funded projects that help in vocational education and training, that support through guidance, mentoring, and accompanying into the job pathways that are not the typical pathways.
No, fantastic. And I think what's really clear is that there is no one way to do it, but that we can learn from each other, and different jurisdictions are tackling the issues and the problems and the challenges in different ways. And keeping those lines of communication open and having sessions like today are really important. No, that's great. I think you've opened up the discussion around this whole notion of retention, because it's one thing to get people in the door, it's another thing to keep them there. And this notion of culture, stereotyping, or role modeling rather, is really important. And so I guess really maybe I'm going to sort of ask, and maybe Elisa and also then Rainer, to comment on this, because it's really, once people get into the workforce, then how do you keep them? And I guess it's a question around what more can be done to make sure that retention is the name of the game.
So on retention, I think it's just, we talk about diversity and inclusion, and I think if we don't put the part of inclusion, we're not covering it as is, because one thing is bringing people in, but then making sure that they have a voice, there are power voices, that they're also able to take part in the decision making. So it's really that there's career development around it. So it goes really beyond, I think, just the entrance. But we still have a lot to do already at the entrance level, I think, from what was said until here. So there's I think in terms of the private sector, perhaps two areas to look into. One is career guidance, and the other one is apprenticeship. Career guidance, I think, really needs to include the employers. So, for instance, career guidance really starts very early. And there are some good examples. There's an example, for instance, of Denmark, where they have Girls' Day with fifth graders showing women in these particular underrepresented jobs. And that's quite important, because that gives those young girls arguments that they can use at home. Because one of the biggest stumbling blocks is the family stereotypes, and how, as you rightly said, families react to some of the things you mentioned. So that gives them arguments, because these women talk about all of the success, but also the challenges that they face as women in these occupations. In Germany, you have, later on at secondary, you have boys' days. And that's quite interesting as well, to present to them the underrepresented occupations. And so teaching, nurses, but also, for instance, a florist. So to go back to Rainer's point, if you present a florist as an entrepreneurial occupation, you touch the streak of a young boy who is interested in being an entrepreneur. So there's really ways of presenting things that we can do very much early, I think, and that's really important, because we've seen how those determine afterwards. And then on apprenticeships, I think that's really important, because it's really about having them, really employers expanding the apprenticeship opportunities, which are very much still limited. And then it's also about the financial incentives around it. So you have some countries, for instance, in Ireland, there's a financial incentive for the apprentices who are in occupations where there is about 80% of underrepresentation. So there you have that. You have in other countries, in Canada as well, you have some support for female as well, bursaries in those cases. That's quite important. But I think it's really about the entrance, and then to make sure that the retention, going back to your point, we have those activities also in place, because that's really where we lose the men and the women once they're in, if they don't have that culture that shows that they're not a minority, that they haven't been put there for some cosmetic reason, but that there's really an intention, and this is their place just as much as others.
No, fantastic. Did you want to make a comment, Buti? Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I mean, so in South Africa, if you're a male nurse, you get mocked. You get mocked in Ghana, in Uganda. Um, it, and so it's discouraging. But secondly, you have a situation wherein people there's a village in Venda where a woman who owns a construction company decided that she's going to employ women, not because she's a woman, but because the men in that in that area were proven to be less productive, would just knock off earlier than they should, and they would also, undermine the woman boss. Exactly, and so it's also the question of culture. But just the last point, what Hollywood did for financial brokers, wherein everyone wanted to be like, what's his name, with suspenders and in a big office, and all of that. So it is all those cultural reinforcements that we see on TV, in magazines, and everywhere else that creates a picture that a miner, a builder is a man, a cook is a woman. And I think we also need to challenge those cultural reinforcements about certain stereotypes that relates to careers, and so on and so forth.
I just wanted to add also social media. I think it was put in the panel before, because we're talking Hollywood, you're talking career guidance with employers, but social media is what speaks to young people. And so if we don't get out the role models to speak about it, I think we're missing really an avenue to change things.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and I think it's one that's underutilized probably, but used in other ways, and can do us a disservice. The mocking of nurses, male nurses, for example. No, I think it's a great point, and perhaps, Ronner, if you want to pick this up as well, because attracting individuals to the workplace is one thing, and you've talked about that, and then there's the retention aspect, and how do you make that happen? I know that in many companies, they actually go out into the field and talk to the families of prospective talents to come into the organization. But then it's a matter of how do you keep them, and so maybe you can talk a bit about what L'Oréal is doing.
Absolutely, I can go there. But just before Wolf of Wall Street, I have to say, no, I've actually got friends that I went to university with that watched that movie, changed the way they dress, and wanted to change their careers. So the influence on social is definitely there. But no, coming back to L'Oréal, creating a family environment is key, and dual careers can also be key in helping retain male and females in relationships. But data points are essential. So we have our pulse survey, and in this we're frequently checking male and female engagement in the organization. There's the basics, gender equity and pay gap. It's making sure you're on that Bloomberg index and you're sitting on there. But then bringing it back to skills. And, as an organization, we've adopted 600 precise skills that actually are built in order to help people transversely move across the organization and remove a focus on specific experience or gender. So this approach is going to be one that's going to help us retain by keeping people alive and comfy and passionate about their roles, but also open them up to new opportunities. And then it's just, you mentioned the STEM earlier, and this duty of the private sector to go a bit further. We've got a commitment with Foundation L'Oréal with UNESCO, where it's not directly helping employees of L'Oréal, and that's the duty of businesses to stretch it further and look at what society needs. And when we look at women in science, only 4% of the women have laureates in Nobel Prizes. So that's 96% males are winning those. And the foundation, year on year, helps 250 women, of which 5 of them have now won Nobel Prizes. So it shows that commitment and their effort to go forward can genuinely make a difference, across the world in these things.
Fantastic commitment and effort, absolutely, without a doubt. Well, anything else to add from on the panel side? Any other comments before we open things up to questions? I think we have a couple of minutes, do we not, Yvonne?
Well, I've got the mic before we can pass it back if you want.
Reiner, you go ahead. And,
whilst they think about questions.
And Buti, without a doubt. Yeah.
From our side, just one message I wanted to share today is a little bit about the need to continue investing in youth. Because if you want diverse succession plans and future leaders in organizations, we need to make that continuous effort. And today, it looks like there might be a bit of a retraction on that because organizations are pulling it in. But if you want diversity, keep on bringing in youth, is what I want to say. Thanks.
Actually, the film I was talking about is the one with Michael Douglas, which is a bit older than. But it would be interesting to see the participation of. I've actually never really thought about this in previous WorldSkills, but to look at the participation of different genders in the different skills sets, and how that I'm not saying that it shows the entire picture of skills preference or career preference, but it tells a story because we obviously pick people on the basis of the careers that they've chosen or the skills programs that they've chosen. So it would be interesting to see, in bricklaying. I know in one of the years we had a young woman who was participating in bricklaying. She's actually one of our, she went on to help design training programs, and so on and so forth, which challenge the stereotype. But I think it would be interesting to look at what's the participation at that level, based on certain skills. Sure.
Without a doubt, I think diving into the data and then doing something about it, I think, is important. And I think that's the message here. So well said. Okay, just looking at the time, I think we have time for a couple of questions. Are there microphones for the room, or people just want to stand up? We have one there. Okay, great. And we'll share up here. So just if you've got a question, say your name and then direct it to a particular panel member, or just ask the question and we can figure it out. Yes, madam.
Thank you very much. I don't have a question per se, but I just have the concept that came out, cosmetic. And indeed, we left here. All the issues that we are discussing and relating to my country, I'm called Safina from Uganda. We have policies that are supporting inclusive of gender, but we are in the home where we have the parents reallocation laws to the boys and the girls. We have professionals like men in Uganda want to do midwifery, but they have been discouraged completely to do midwifery because our culture considers every woman to be a mother. And getting a man, seeing the privacy of the woman, is somehow discouraging. So what I wanted to talk about is the concept of cosmetic. How best can we manage that? Because a lot has been done. Policies are in place that are supporting gender equity, but somehow the concept of cosmetic is overruling. That's what I wanted to comment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And any comments from any of the panelists? No?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So there are a couple of things that are really working. One is in some countries involving religious leaders has been very useful about showing that these roles are nowhere written, are against any of the initial thoughts. So that has been useful in some countries. In some others, it's really working with the parents very early and showing how these mean success for their children as well, and how they don't necessarily affect their family orientation thereafter. So going back to the point of the role models, having women as mothers in those roles, showing that it's kind of a gradual understanding by fitting within the traditions. And so traditional leaders as well have been very useful in that. So I think it's really talking, if you will, the language that the parents and the more traditional families will understand. And so I think it's really, that helps in that gradual process.
We were, Manuela, by all means.
Yeah, I also wanted to bring in the European Union perspective, because we legislated a few years ago on work-life balance, because it's really important that companies don't recruit men because they will not go on parental leave and so on. So we introduced paternity leave when the child is born, so that both parents may be able to bond with their children, and then parental leave that should be paid also for men. And I think this is really should change the way also companies perceive their workers, not as those that will go away because they have children. It can happen to the mothers, but also to the fathers. And I think equally sharing, and also the legislation also foresees carers leave, so that it creates also some equality for the workers, whether they are women or men, in their caring responsibility.
No, an excellent example, and it also reinforces the fact, and your comment as well, thank you very much, reinforces the fact that, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it's going to take, many different actors, players, and also actions to make a difference. And everybody around the table, obviously, it needs to be focused on the same objective. So, no, excellent. Do we have time for one more question? Yeah? Okay. I've got the okay from the back. Gary.
Oh, sorry, I stole someone's spot there. It's probably a question for the government people in the room. So you talked and you touched on earlier around incentives for employers to do some of these activities. We do see in some countries policies enforcing employers to do this. So I come from Australia, but we have the Australian Skills Guarantee, and if government are spending big amounts of money on infrastructure or IT or the health sector, they're starting to put policies in place around percentages of workers have to meet certain gender or criteria. Do you think that's the right direction to go? It's probably just a comment from the panelists.
Well, it's working in South Africa. We have seen both in terms of racial equity and gender equity, where companies have to comply with certain quotas for them to be allowed to do work with government. So if you don't have this number of women on your workforce, you're not allowed to to do work with government. So that's the kind of incentive. But not only that, there are also punitive measures that are introduced to those companies which do not comply. So we think that it really works.
Any other comments? Manuela, did you want to chime in? No? Not to put you on the spot, but...
Yeah, no. Well, I think these are rather decisions that are taken at the national level.
Exactly.
Of course, we have put the issue of women on company boards on the spot, because I think, especially in Europe, we have not enough female representation on company boards. And that was, I think, the initiative with some quotas. What I would like to mention that in the European Commission, we had several years ago a big imbalance between women and men in managerial positions, and putting quotas has really helped. We are now at gender balance at all levels of management. And this was really, and you have seen how still difficult it is in the creation of the new Commission, as discussions are going on whether the president designate will be able to have a gender balanced commissioners college.
Right. Exactly. All right.
Hi, my name is Siddharth and I come from India. One particular point which I wanted your comments on, usually the STEM careers are more expensive as compared to non-STEM careers. And typically in our country, access to finance or access to the right cost becomes a hindrance sometimes for women taking up STEM careers. So, is there any thought or best practice on building a digital infrastructure for facilitating of scholarships? Maybe it's a digital open infrastructure and like a collective facilitating scholarships for women students who want to join STEM but cannot join just because of lack of access to finance.
I mean, what we do in South Africa over and above the state-sponsored bursary is that we also, allocate specific incentives for women participation in the science, technology, engineering, mathematics-related subjects. But we also incentivize institutions for graduating more women generally, but also in those specific areas. It's not at a scale at which we really want to have it because of the resources. But I think the fact that we've started doing something along those lines, should begin to, yield some results. But what we, also do is to encourage the private sector to, to invest in women in those, careers. So, and I think finally we have what we call the National Research Foundation, whose primary focus is to fund research and development related projects, predominantly in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we've seen a lot of uptake of young women in those areas. So you've got to be very intentional about it. Yes, provide access to everyone, but incentivize those who promote access to these careers which are traditionally reserved for men. Incentivize those who, encourage women participation in those careers.
But STEM careers are also an opportunity for women. So, for instance, micro-credentials have been particularly useful in that case. They're shorter and they're recognized by a lot of employers. And these are the kind of careers that a lot of women with family obligations are able to do from home. So I think they also create opportunities beyond the cost of a lengthy career.
Yeah, that's a great point. Micro-credentialing offers huge opportunities. We do have one question. I think we're going to have to stop because I'm getting the high sign, but unfortunately we have to stop now. Is that it? Okay. We can talk after the fact, but we've got a couple of questions up here. So otherwise you're going to miss lunch. But anyway, we're so happy to have had the chance to talk to all of you today. And a big thank you and a round of applause to our panelists here today. Thanks as well to our conference coalition partners. I think we've had a really good discussion, lots of ideas. We've unpacked some of the issues and the topics, but I think also I had an opportunity to talk about some of the solutions. So I hope you've taken some notes, and I certainly have. It's been a great sort of solution-oriented discussion. There is also, I mentioned this afternoon at 4 o'clock, there is a session that is related. It's in the same dome, I guess that's what we're going to call this, and it's Women in STEM right here in the same room. So we'll be able to carry on that conversation, and that's where we're going to share some exciting best practices about and examples from very different projects. So we'll be able to get into this. So hold your questions for 4 o'clock. As well, you've got lunch, which is happening right out here. We'll go out this door and just follow the smells of lunch, and then you get into the curated sessions from 2 to 4. So enjoy that, and bon appétit, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.